Okay, how's everyone doing? Everyone hear me okay? The mic's working all right? Not a massive classroom, but since we're doing lecture capture, I have to be hooked up to the microphone. If it gets too loud, just go like this or something like that, and I'll see about turning it down. It is just 3:10 right now. I'm going to give folks a couple more minutes since this is the first day of the quarter, and this basement lecture hall can be a bit tricky to find. But while we're waiting, just out of curiosity, one of my favorite things to do here is to kind of look at the composition of survey courses like this. Out of curiosity, how many folks in here are WFC majors, Wildlife, Fisheries, and Conservation? All right, cool. Yeah, good chunk, yeah. How many folks would say you are a major in some kind of biology or ecology, but not necessarily conservation? Awesome, cool. How about physical scientists, chemists, engineers, that sort of thing? Yeah, good for you guys, great. Humanities, arts, literature, that sort of thing? Hey, great, this is awesome. We got a great mix in here. That is absolutely fantastic. Well, my name is Rob Blank. I am an ecologist, shocking to everyone in here because I'm teaching this class. And now that it's been a couple minutes, I've stalled long enough, and we will go ahead and jump into the course. So welcome to WFC 50. If this is not the course you think you're expecting to be in, now is your judgment-free chance to leave the room. Excellent, fantastic. Cool, so the purpose of this class is to kind of give an overview and really a virtual tour of all the habitats, ecosystems, and vertebrate, meaning animals that have a backbone, much like us, of California. We have a really incredible state here, and there is a lot of diversity and a lot of really cool natural history to cover here. So really the course is designed to let everyone in this room get a chance to think, act, look, and observe in the way that natural scientists do when we are working in ecosystems, specifically in California. Out of curiosity, anyone know what all of these vertebrates have in common? Yeah, thought over here?
They're all state animals.
Yeah, absolutely, dead on. All of these animals are California's state animal in one way or another to varying degrees of weird granularity. We have our state animal, the grizzly bear, despite the fact that it no longer occurs in California. Whoops, that's kind of our fault. We have our state marine fish, the Garibaldi, which was actually named after an Italian politician. We have the red-legged frog, our state amphibian. We have the humpback whale, our state marine mammal. We have the California quail, our state bird. The leatherback sea turtle, our state marine reptile. This isn't getting specific enough. Our state freshwater fish is the golden trout. And then we even have down here our state terrestrial reptile, which is, anyone know this one? Desert tortoise, yeah, exactly. A really cool one that we can see in decent numbers thanks to really good conservation efforts in some grassland and desert ecosystems, mostly in Southern California. So just a heads up, I kind of put this in here to run myself, but all of our lectures are going to be recorded. That is why I'm mic'd up right now. That is why we are hooked up to our lecture capture, but this is just a chance for everyone to be observing like a great horned owl and being very, very careful to watch for great horned owls like our ground squirrel species in California. Anyone know where this is, roughly? Shout it out if you know it. This is around the Big Sur area, right? And this is just one snapshot that I like to show at the beginning of courses like this, just to kind of give one really brief introduction to a unique habitat of California, and also how humans have kind of colonized it and explored it, right? Hacking a highway for transit by automobiles into solid rock on a wave-beaten coast like this is no mean feat. And we as humans have, for better and for worse, explored and exploited different habitats of California to a massive degree. Mostly post-colonization, but even to a certain extent, pre-contact with Western civilizations, right? And one of the responsibilities and really privileges we have living in this state and being educated in the state is to be exposed to this really incredible diversity of habitats, animals, plants, bugs are in fact animals, but not vertebrates for this class, ecosystems, right? And so as I mentioned, the goal of this course is to kind of give a broad overview of some of the different ecosystems, habitats, communities that we have in California to hopefully give everyone in here an appreciation of what those ecosystems are like, some of the really cool, unique features they have, some of the incredible adaptations that animals and plants and abiotic factors have developed in order to survive in these really diverse environments. California, this is kind of a cliche, but is one of these places where you can go up to a mountain and ski in the morning and then sunbathe on a sandy beach in the afternoon. Really incredible. And so learning about all of this diversity, all of this variability is a really cool thing to be able to do. So just out of curiosity, who in this room is already like, I am 100% a naturalist, I go camping every weekend, I'm not listening to you because I'm thinking about camping right now. I drove 4 hours out of my way to look at a rare species of moss. Yeah, excellent, cool. Anybody like, yeah, I really like nature, but group one can maybe chill a little bit? Yeah, okay, sounds about right. Anybody feel like, yeah, this is interesting, I was kind of curious about natural systems, but haven't really had an interest in the past? Okay, this is great. And you're like, I hate natural systems, they can go straight to hell. Oh, great, this is good. Yeah, a couple of us, fantastic. Well, hey, you know what? If that is your opinion at the end of the class, that is still fine, but at least you'll be able to say it from an informed perspective. Right? Okay, so I talked about this course being called Natural History. let's talk about what natural history actually is, because it turns out it's kind of one of these nebulous terms that has changed over centuries of use by scientists and by non-scientists too, right? It used to be that natural history, or natural philosophy sometimes, was kind of a rough synonym for science. Kind of back in the days when science was done more or less exclusively by kind of like rich white guys with mustaches this wide, still kind of done to a certain extent, but less bad. Natural history kind of referred to any pursuit of science. There are still some organizations that keep that name. There's a very, very large scientific organization in the UK called the Royal Society of Natural Philosophers. Really cool science, but kind of keeps this outdated name, right? Today, natural history has been a little bit more solidified in terminology, and we tend to use it to describe this descriptive way of observing and documenting phenomena in nature, right? When we talk about natural history, it's less about scientists performing these very delicate, specific, manipulated experiments to collect scientific data, and more kind of a somewhat formalized way of going out into nature and observing in a structured fashion what we see. Observing and documenting natural phenomena to record them for posterity and to be able to share with others. There's a good definition that came out in 2014. A lot of people have tried to kind of solidify this over time, but Tewksbury, very famous naturalist, he describes natural scientists as the fundamental properties of organisms, what they are, how and where they live, and the biotic and abiotic, fancy scientific jargon for alive and not alive, interactions that link them to communities and ecosystems are the domain of natural history. So hey, it's one of those nebulous terms still. You can come up with your own definition if you like, but this is a pretty good one that kind of covers how we're going to be approaching natural history. So let's start with a little bit of a quiz here. You're not going to get graded on this one, right? How well do you know California natural history? Here we are in the massive state of California, roughly our location here. Let's put ourselves in a brief hypothetical. You're spending the day out in Napa County, not a bad place to be, right? Maybe tasting wine, maybe not. It's time to return to Davis. You're driving back in this picturesque road up in the hills in this lovely oak savanna woodland. Bad news, huge earthquake, right? In a remote area, not a lot of other cars coming through. A huge earthquake strikes and your vehicle slips in the road down into a rugged ravine, a gully wash. Happens to me 6 times a year, right? So you're unscathed, but your phone is shattered and your car is hopelessly stuck, no chance of moving. And so now it is up to you and you alone to get yourself back to civilization here, right? Here we are. Here's a nice photo of where you've landed. Determined, you all decide collectively to head into the wilderness. It's now up to your knowledge of natural history to help you with these tough decisions as you try to survive this scenario. So first, you got to get out of your car. And I got some bad news for you. You have very sharp eyes, and so you can see on either side of your crashed car there is a snake sitting by the ground in a defensive position, coiled and ready to strike. On the left, we have snake A. On the right, on the passenger side, we have snake B. Which side do you want to get out? Who thinks A? Anybody thinking B? Hey, great, this is awesome. You survived your first trial here. So on the left, we have one of our harmless California residents, a gopher snake. Really, really cool predators in their ecosystem, but not venomous. Not in the same taxonomic clade that is sort of evolutionary history as our friend, not considered our friend necessarily, the western rattlesnake over here, right? We probably saw the rattle over here. We can look at characteristics like the patterning, the shape of the head, these sensory pits, various other things, to tell us that this snake is probably dangerous. It has characteristics of a group of snakes known to be dangerous to us, right? So we can use these characteristics of natural histories, these features we recognize to understand and derive meaningful survival for us in this case, right? So great, looks like just about all of us managed to get out of our car alive, right? Bad news is, we need to find our way back to civilization. Luckily, we are all roughly aware of Poudre Creek, this body of water that runs through this part of the Central Valley. And we know that it runs through the town of Winters, pretty close to Davis, right? And so we think, we're pretty close to Poudre Creek somewhere. If we can find water, we can probably find our way to Poudre Creek and navigate back to Winters, right? So we're going to decide to listen to birds and try to navigate our way back. So we listen to a few bird songs, right? First we have this one. Let's call that an emphatic rattle, right? Kind of up in the trees. We hear this one too. We also have a third song we might describe as a buoyant trill filtering in through the trees here. All beautiful bird songs, right? Stunning. But if we want to find our way to Poudre Creek, anyone think that they know which one they might want to follow? Anybody think song A is a reliable way to go? Anybody think song B? Song C? Who wants to just go back to the rattlesnake and die already? Cool. Well, I got news for you. It turns out that A is the song of our belted kingfisher. Really fascinating California resident, this crazy cool bird with a bill that's much too large for its head that observes this or conducts this behavior you can see in Davis of plunge diving from 60 feet up in the air, splashing down and essentially harpooning fish that are almost as big as it is. So that is the bird that we would probably most reliably follow to water. Song B was our northern flicker, one of our local woodpecker species you can see in the Arboretum all the time. Unfortunately for the folks who decided to follow it, they tend to like sort of hilly woodland habitats, so you're probably not on Poudre Creek, so you're a little bit more tired, maybe sweaty, have to start over finding your route back home. And bird C is a wren tit. Bird with a fantastic name, really cool West Coast species, has some really fascinating behaviors. Very small, but unfortunately for the folks who chose to follow it, lives in dense chaparral. It's kind of spiky, shrubby ecosystem we see near the coast and in near desert areas in California. So folks who follow bird C, maybe a little scratched up, maybe tired, still alive. So good news there. But all the walking has certainly made you hungry, right? And so you do see that you're in an area where there are several bushes that appear to be bearing some kind of berries, some kind of fruit. The good news for you is you're carrying the weirdest field guide in the world, which lists the names and appearances of these bushes, but without telling you which ones are edible, safe to eat, et cetera, right? So we have 3 fairly similar looking species here. And in fact, in your weird field guide, it lists their names. We're able to identify them to name at least, right? But I'll tell you as a little bit of a spoiler, there's only one you probably want to eat. So take a look at that. Anyone have a thought as to maybe I would like to eat berry A? It looks delicious. Berry B? Berry C? Yeah, it does look kind of delicious, that kind of red-pink color and shiny. We'll talk about this. So it turns out those who did not say A, you were right. This is toyon. It's a California native. They're planted all over campus in the Arboretum. They're beautiful. And birds eat them all the time. Ever heard of cedar waxwings? Oh, one of the best kept secrets on campus. They're really cool. We'll talk about them later on. Birds eat them just fine because they can process certain amounts of cyanide, but we cannot. And so if we were to eat these toyon berries, we would not die, because luckily we have evolved in our own way these reactions to poisonous chemicals. It means that you would vomit somewhat quickly after trying to eat these toyon berries. Believe it or not, despite their name, we think of nightshades as fairly poisonous, the American nightshade is edible, when it is ripe at least. It can be a little bit unpalatable if it's not ripe, but if you wait till those berries are ripe, they're totally edible and a plant that can be found around here. They're in the same family, Solanaceae, again, animal families and plant families, as tomatoes, right? So they've been described as having somewhere between a tomato and blueberry taste. Doesn't sound great to me. I haven't eaten them myself, but they're what they are. Manzanilla, you can in fact eat. It is not poisonous. It is extremely sour and bitter, does not have a great texture, does not have a great level of nutrients for humans, but you can eat it, right? So progress. We're making our way back to town. This is fantastic. But all those carbs from your berries are fine, but you'd like a little bit of protein, right? For some reason, when you left your car in the ravine during the earthquake, this is all very likely, you brought your fishing gear with you. Very prescient of you. And so over the course of your fishing effort, you managed to catch a bunch of small fish, little minnows, maybe netting them, that sort of thing. You also caught 3 larger fish, right? You don't necessarily want to cook and eat these right now, so maybe you want to keep them in a bucket. Problem is, depending on the species, if you put a larger fish in a bucket with smaller fish, you might end up with just the larger fish in the bucket right now, right? So let's use our guesses or knowledge of natural history here. We have to pick one of these, or maybe 2, to put in the bucket, right? Who thinks it would be fairly safe to put fish A in the bucket with our tiny little fish? Anybody think it'd be fairly safe to put fish B in there? Anybody feel pretty strongly that fish C is the one that would be safe to safeguard our fish here? Well, it turns out that A is a native species we call the Sacramento sucker. They're called suckers because they're bottom feeders. They have a really interesting jaw, not typical of a lot of fish. That means they sort of scrub things off the bottom of benthic underwater surfaces. Doesn't really eat small fishes in a very predatory way, so probably safe. B is our white sturgeon, a really incredible fish. Really amazing. Has these bony scutes, these scales on the outside. These white sturgeon can grow to over 8 feet long. But it turns out they're also bottom feeders. They are jawless. They don't have crunching jaws in the same way that we and a lot of other animals do. And they're also mostly bottom feeders. So your little fish are probably fairly safe. Bad news for the group who chose C. This is the Sacramento pike minnow. Another native fish out here, but a voracious predator. They make their living by chasing down and eating smaller fish. So it turns out that if you decided to put your Sacramento pike minnow in with your smaller catches, you may have lost some of them or may have to go to a certain amount of gross trouble to get them back. Right? So here's your Sacramento pike minnow. Right? All right, continuing on our journey. Bad news. Next animal we encounter is a striped skunk. Latin name Mephidus mephidus, which literally means stinky, stinky. Right? We like to describe things as accurately as we can in animal taxonomy. Right? You don't necessarily want to get sprayed. Anyone been sprayed by a skunk? Oh, wow. Okay, a few of us. I didn't want to jinx us by having no one done it. I've been sprayed by a skunk a couple times because I'm an idiot. But learn from my example here, right? So you've run into a skunk. You guys are on a trail facing each other down. What do? Who thinks you should hold your ground, making noise, raising your arms, making yourself visible to make yourself look bigger? Anyone think that's the way to go? Which of us are cowards, run away calmly but swiftly? And who thinks you just charge the skunk to make it retreat? You know, go in, fist swinging, we ball or we die. Okay, excellent. I'm glad you guys are more intelligent than I've been historically, because the answer is, of course, for skunks, to run away calmly but swiftly. Skunks know that they're kind of the bosses around here. They're not too afraid of anything. So knowing that that is a behavioral characteristic of skunks, having that natural history awareness is a really good way to avoid smelling absolutely horrible when you get home to Davis. Incidentally, baby skunks look like that. I feel like everyone deserves to know that. They're very cute. Incidentally, skunks, very rarely aggressive. They tend not to want to spray. One of these things that you kind of pick up as you're out and about. All right, but as it does on our journey back from our flipped car in our ravine in Napa after our fishing trip and berry eating expedition and odd attempt at aquaculture, we are feeling the call of nature, and so we have to use the restroom. Luckily for us, natural TP is abundant out in California, but at some point we have to make something of a fateful choice, and it turns out that what you choose to use as TP in nature can have serious consequences for the rest of your day and beyond. So while reaching for something to use, we have a few options here. Who's going to go ahead and reach for plant A? How about plant B? How about plant C? Okay, interesting. Wow, that is almost incredibly unanimous. So those who recognize plant A, you are very wise, because this is poison oak. You've never gotten a bad poison oak rash before, or poison oak rash in general? Yeah, I luckily have not. It's not for lack of bad choices. It's just luck of the draw, I think. I don't know why it bothers me so much, but poison oak, the rash is always described as weeping. I don't know why that upsets me so much, but it really does. It's very descriptive. But luckily for us, that's the only dangerous one here. B is our California sycamore, our beautiful native tree, one of many. And then C is a California grape. We have a native grape species that fruits just like domesticated grapes in California. So luckily you guys are more or less good to go. All right, last but not least, we decide we're not going to make it home by sunset. Probably the smartest thing to do would be to go into an area and try to find a sheltered place to sleep. Summer, California, temperatures aren't too terrible. Luckily for us, we find a network of caves, right? Fantastic. But there are a few caves in here, each of which have different sets of tracks in the soil leading to the cave entrances. And we have to choose which one we think would probably be the best choice to sleep. And so in cave A, we have these sort of broad sets of tracks. In cave B, we have these very distinctive looking tracks that have 4 toes and no indentations for claws. And in C, we have more 4-toed tracks, but with indentations from claws here, right? And I think cave A is the safest place to spend the night. How about cave B? And then cave C, I think is the best choice here. Okay, you're pretty split on this one, right? Cave A, probably not the best news. It is in fact black bear. This foot-shaped shape of these tracks is a pretty distinctive thing that bears tend to display. So yeah, maybe it's a small bear. Maybe you'll get lucky. Maybe it'll run away. But personally, I might not enter that cave. Cave B, I'm sorry to tell you, is a mountain lion. Cornered mountain lions are notoriously not particularly friendly. So things like the shape of this lobate pad is a good way to ID these tracks, as well as the lack of claws. Felines, their cat family, have retractable claws. So one of the things we often use to ID cat tracks is a lack of claw marks. Whereas canines are unable to retract their claws when they walk. These are in fact the tracks of a red fox. And if you intrude on a red fox's cave, you're probably just fine. It might run away, or it may decide to chill and hang out with you. You never know. Awesome. All right, and lo and behold, after facing this series of grueling natural history trials, you guys have made it through your severe accident. You have survived, hopefully without a weeping rash, skunk spray, and necrotic rattlesnake bite, but who knows? And you arrive at the place that you would of course go following an incident like this, which is the UC Davis Welcome Center. So welcome back to campus, you survived. Okay, so that's our little brief intro here. And I know that some of this might seem a little bit silly, right? The idea that you would be in a situation like this and forced to come to terms with choices like this, it's kind of odd. It's not something that's ever going to happen. But the reason I bring it up is that we want to talk about the roots of natural history, how this stuff actually developed, and how we as society, cultures, people learned this much about the natural world. And it turns out that it's really not that long ago that these kinds of choices and the need for this knowledge was really relevant to success and survival in the world, right? We are a fairly industrialized society. We've done a pretty good job of kind of insulating ourselves from the risks, the dangers, the hazards, the discomforts of nature. That's a pretty recent thing, even in terms of human history, right? Fairly recently, even within this last century, a certain amount of knowledge of the natural world was necessary for success and survival, right? M.K. Anderson, sort of a famous cultural anthropologist, had a good description of this. Every day of every year for millennia, the indigenous people of California interacted with the native plants and animals that surrounded them. They transformed roots, berries, shoots, bones, shells, and feathers into medicines, meals, bows, and baskets, and achieved an intimacy with nature unmatched by the modern-day wilderness guide, trained field botanist, or applied geologist. And that really is true. A lot of us, including many of us in this room, are dedicating our lives to studying natural history, to studying ecology, biology, and that sort of thing. But there really is this certain intimacy and certain attachment and involvement that is unique to societies and cultures that interact with these systems daily and rely on that knowledge to survive. So the reason I bring up this kind of silly series of trials and choices and everything is to highlight that natural history has historically been incredibly valued and remains to be for several reasons. All these photos are different food marketplaces in different parts of the world, right? Various more developed industrialized companies might have a lot of packaged goods, this sort of thing up here, where we don't really see the source. You might have areas where we have raw fish markets, or even treated or processed fish markets here. Of course, raw vegetables are available in a lot of places, right? And even in certain places, things like bushmeat, whatever vertebrates, whatever mammals or birds or fish or whatever can be hauled out of the ecosystem around the area is what's up for sale. And the fact is, as society develops, for better and for worse, we become a little bit more insulated from the realities and origins of the things we eat, the things we depend on, resources, foods, medicines, etc. And so it's really important, even though we're not in a place where we have to worry about rattlesnakes by our passenger side door, to be thinking about the sources, both in terms of actual substance and knowledge, of the things and resources we rely on. And when it comes to natural history, this is actually going to be a fairly big part of this class, it's not even just the knowledge. There really is an art to this practice, right? And it turns out that historically, for centuries, and even going into modern day, the ability to observe, describe, draw, preserve aspects of the natural world ends up being really, really cool when it comes to documenting and sharing scientific information. We're pretty lucky in this day and age. The vast majority of us have a pretty good camera sitting in our pockets. It can be pretty easy to document things in a very accurate way, in some cases. But historically, the practice of being able to document and record measurements and share them with other people was largely art-based and record-based. And it turns out that even though photography is widely available and really at the touch of a button for any of us, the ability to describe, observe, draw, and preserve parts of the natural world is still really valuable for scientific pursuits, specimens, conservation, all of the above. Because learning how to look at these objects, these species, these systems, with a really critical, curious, and scientific eye takes a little bit of training. And that's really what we're here to do today. Even ranging from things like doing scientific drawings and descriptions of species. These are some old scientific drawings of cuttlefish, trying to document some of the organ systems, tentacles, tentinellas, that sort of thing. We have things like preserved specimens for moths. Anyone ever been to the Bohart Museum on campus here? Worth a trip if you get a chance. We have one of the premier entomological museums in any college in North America. Who's heard of The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin? That's a good one to hear about. Charles Darwin was kind of one of the people who really formalized this idea of evolution and natural selection for the first time. And some of his contentions and discoveries and the things he was arguing for were dependent on how he drew and described species of finches on the Galapagos Islands. Right? And of course we have museums. This is the American Museum of Natural History here, really critical for documenting aspects of natural history. Right? So everything I'm talking about here is sort of historical, how we've looked at things in the past, why this was important, what has been sort of key to learning natural history. But it turns out natural history and even some really fundamental aspects of it are really critical even in this day and age, right? There are a lot of things we use, even fairly basic knowledge of the natural world and ecosystems for today, right? Human health. Cholera, it's a really famous example of this. Cholera is a really terrible disease. Affected a lot of people in previous centuries, still affects a lot of people in developing countries and more poverty-stricken areas, that sort of thing. Turns out cholera is a disease caused by a bacteria, right? It's a pathogen, this little bacteria that gets inside our system, causes a lot of havoc, can be really unpleasant and potentially fatal, right? It turns out that cholera, the presence of this bacteria, is associated with the presence of zooplankton, certain types of zooplankton in contaminated water, right? When I say zooplankton, what I'm referring to is little tiny animals, slightly around the size of microscopic, that go and eat other animals, heterotrophic. And those zooplankton, in the way that food chains work, are dependent on abundant resources, what we call phytoplankton, which are sort of like really microscopic plants. So understanding that, it turns out, as sort of silly and arcane as it sounds, can be really important for human health, because it turns out in the modern day, we can use things like satellite imagery to track blooms of phytoplankton, which lead to blooms of zooplankton, certain types, and can lead to cholera outbreaks. And so by understanding the natural history and interactions of this natural system, we can anticipate and predict things like serious human disease outbreaks and take proactive action to prevent bad consequences from happening. And we heard of bird flu this year? Yeah, it's kind of in the news pretty often. Highly pathogenic avian influenza. I myself work on this, right? Avian influenza affects a lot of domestic species, can affect humans too, but it's also carried a lot by wild bird populations. In addition to some other projects, I work with hunters. When we work with hunters, folks who harvest waterfowl, ducks, and geese out in the wild, we'll talk to them, and we'll go out with literal swabs and take swabs of that duck's saliva and send them into a lab where we can test for the presence of avian influenza, for antibodies or the pathogen itself. Understanding the migratory routes and vectors and where this disease shows up in wild populations helps us understand where it might be moving and spreading, right? So just basic natural history can help us predict these massive, massive changes. Wildfires, huge. Wildfires are a big deal in California, right? Even today in Southern California with high winds. Understanding how plants grow, how potential fuel is deposited, what the natural historical regime of fires in the system were. Because as humans, we don't like fire. We're not big fans. We tend to suppress it a lot. We prevent fires under any circumstances. Whereas historically, before colonization in certain areas, fires were not uncommon, right? And so we try to understand these dynamics and see how they might be manipulated, managed to avoid these catastrophic wildfires. Obviously, there are recreational activities, things like bird watching, hunting, backpacking, hiking, all this stuff really helps to know the natural system you're working in. And of course, we have less tangible reasons. Just connecting people with nature. Stories, critters, the aesthetic values of nature, the spiritual values of nature, certainly not to be underestimated in a human society. Really important stuff. And natural history for a lot of folks ends up being an entry point into deeper scientific inquiry. This ability to look at any kind of phenomenon in nature and say, I wonder why that's happening, is really kind of a gateway drug into asking deeper and structured questions that answer scientific inquiry. Anyone have an experience like that? Like, I've looked at nature and been, why is that happening? That's kind of funky. I wonder where that's going. Cool, yeah, we'll talk about that quite a bit this course. And knowledge of natural history can have really important effects on all kinds of stuff. Anyone ever heard of Silent Spring, book by Rachel Carson? Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, it's a really good one. Really foundational book that was written and published in 1962 by the American naturalist Rachel Carson. And Silent Spring is this book about the use of pesticides, specifically one called DDT, and its effect on native ecosystems. DDT really affects a lot of animals, specifically birds. It messes with how eggs are laid, makes the shells really thin, and led to these catastrophic declines in a lot of bird species. And Rachel Carson, by a lot of reckoning, is sort of accredited with starting this modern movement of environmentalism in the US and even beyond, right? The Environmental Protection Agency was established kind of as a result of this green wave that happened after Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, and DDT, that pesticide, was banned. In history, in the past, there are a lot of examples of really, really big folks. There's this there's a thing called a great man theory. It's a weird language, I know, but this idea that individuals really set us forward, in these leaps and bounds in scientific understanding. And the fact is, any great discovery is usually the contributions of a lot of different people. There was no one individual that decided evolution's a thing. But we tend to see these icons that really appear in natural history over time. So in the past, we have people like Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was famously the person who went to the Galapagos, championed this idea of natural selection, evolution, inheritance of traits and evolving traits, adapting over time, really important to modern science. Jane Goodall, really famous biologist, worked with chimpanzees, largely in Africa. She's still alive. She still tours and lectures. She is a champion of animal rights. She did incredible foundational work in the behavior, intelligence, and thinking of animals, specifically chimpanzees, our closest relatives. E.O. Wilson passed away in 2020, but he was a very famous ecologist who worked a lot with really small ecosystems, ants. And he really did a great job of sharing these ideas of natural history, what the natural world is like, what it must be like to experience the world as an ant. That sort of turned a lot of people onto ecology and natural history. Now, I will say, these are cool folks. None of these are my favorite pictures ever of a naturalist. My favorite picture ever of a naturalist is this one. This is Konrad Lorenz. He did a lot of work on imprinting in swans and geese and ducks, why they follow their mother. Unfortunately, because we can't have any nice things, it turns out he is a literal Nazi, so don't worry about him, but it's still a good picture, I know. Luckily for us, we have some much more positive role models to follow in the modern age. People like Scott Edwards. Scott Edwards is a really famous hotshot natural historian, scientist, ecologist right now. He does a lot of work with things like the genetics and genomics of seabirds, things like bacterial disease outbreak and spread in birds, so really preventing some catastrophic pandemics in birds. He's been instrumental in studies of avian flu. We have people like Mireia Mayor. If anyone ever heard of Mireia Mayor? Mayor? A couple folks. Yeah, really cool. Worth checking out if you get the chance. She's got a couple of great stories. She's a National Geographic correspondent. By training, an anthropologist, mostly studies people, right? But the thing is, a basic knowledge of natural history led to a really cool discovery in her case. She was doing field work in Madagascar. She saw a little lemur. It's like, I don't really recognize that. That looks distinctive and different. She tried to figure out what it was. Turns out it was an undiscovered species and one of the smallest primates in the world. Because she had a natural curiosity and sort of basic knowledge of what this natural history was supposed to be like, she was able to go through and discover a brand new species. She's got a really good book too. It's called Pink Boots and a Machete. She was also a cheerleader, which is pretty incredible. Really broad diversity of expertise there. And when I bring this up, I really want to, without sounding corny, point out that you guys could be next. There's a lot of mystery left in the natural world out here, and there's a lot of possibility for discovery with modern technology, modern approaches, modern perspectives. So really do think about this as we're going through this class. Okay, so let's talk about the course itself, yeah? So, who the hell am I to talk to you about this stuff, to be all preachy about natural history? My name is Rob Blank. I am a PhD candidate in the department here. My work is, if you can't tell, mostly with birds. I work with a variety of different aspects of birds. For my PhD work, I mostly do foraging ecology, how birds find and manage to eat food, how they survive in large numbers and areas. But through dumb luck, I have been able to work on a lot of different bird systems in Hawaii, New Zealand, Canada, the UK, the deserts in the US, all kinds of different spots. I also had to get stitches when a penguin bit me. I'm not kidding, it's a real thing. So anyway, I really have a strong interest in natural history. It's why I'm finishing up my PhD on it, and I really love talking about this stuff. A course like this, where we're sort of talking broadly about these areas of natural history, is a lot of fun for myself and the other folks who are here from in this class. So yeah, hi, nice to meet you all. You guys are welcome to call me Rob. You can call me Professor Blank. I am not a doctor yet. That comes in March, so don't call me Dr. Blank. Cool, but luckily, I am not alone in taking you guys on this trip. You guys have a couple of fantastic graduate TAs who are present with us today. We have Harrison Morrow and Tanaya Russell. They'll be running your discussion/lab sections, which I'll talk about a little bit later on, and so you don't have to hear me screeching at you repeatedly all the time. They will cut in pretty frequently. Okay. So anytime we start a new class, it's always a really good idea to kind of begin with a community agreement here. Some standards of explicit behavior to kind of guide how we work with each other as colleagues. You guys are grown-ass adults at this point, so you've probably heard this speech several times, but whenever we start a new class, we're gonna be working together for the next 10-ish weeks, and finals week too. But it's always a really good idea to kind of think about and re-examine our ethics and values as colleagues in a classroom, right? So the things that I asked of you are the following. One of the biggest things is that we all be respectful of one another here. Always use kind words and actions when we're interacting with each other, whether with me or yourselves, right? Obviously, goes without saying, we do not lie or cheat. Science only works because people trust science. And if scientists cheat, if natural historians cheat and lie, science goes out the window, and that would be tough. This is a classroom, right? So I would ask that everyone here please promote an atmosphere of learning here. Take some thought, try to be present mentally and physically. Folks are on their laptops and phones, that's totally fine with me, but if you're doing something unrelated, please try not to distract those around you. And one of the biggest ones, this class is for a variety of people of different expertises. I am so jazzed. We have engineers and historians and artists in here. I think it's incredible. So one of the biggest things I ask everyone is please do not be afraid to be wrong, right? If you have a question, I guarantee you are not the only one in the room who has that question. If you have an observation, please feel free to share it. Please raise your hand if you're going to judge and laugh at anybody who asks a silly question in this class. Yeah, ditto, right? So please, understand this is a really safe place. Consider sharing your perspective, asking questions when you have one, right? Biggest thing here, it's our job to collectively, as colleagues, create an environment where everyone can succeed here, right? So please do let us know if there's something in this class as we go forward that isn't working for you, right? And so on that note, I would ask one favor, folks. Everyone has a note card and some kind of writing implement here. So on one side of the note card, as we're kind of going through here, take your time. Don't have to if you don't feel this is useful, but if you do, I certainly appreciate the input. On one side of your note card, write 2 suggestions or expectations you have of your peers, right? These can be something as simple as please don't chew loudly. One I get pretty often when I teach courses is please take care of your personal hygiene. This is a small, tight classroom, and so BO can be a serious problem, but write down a couple things you think would be useful and expectations you have for your peers. Then on the other side of the note card, please do me a favor and write a couple of expectations that you have for me. So things that I can do as an instructor to make your time easier here, right? As you do this, you do not need to write your name by any means. This is meant to be anonymous. That being said, if you think that there is something that would be useful for me to know about you in this context, feel free to let me know. You can write your name if you want, but if you'd like to be anonymous, you're more than welcome to do that. So take your time with that. We have about 15 minutes. Don't feel rushed at all, but be thinking of stuff. On that note, I really encourage asking for help. As we do lecture live, today is kind of our introductory section, obviously, but on most days we'll be pausing regularly to let folks kind of think about stuff, ask questions, whatever needs to be done, right? When that happens, I really encourage folks to ask questions. As I said, sharing your perspective is always really appreciated. Now, the one thing I will say on this is if you're someone who has a lot of different questions or someone who likes to raise your hand a lot and comment, offer your perspective kind of as a commentary, that's great. I also have a certain amount of material that I need to get through in the course of a day, so I hope no one will be offended. If anyone really is being enthusiastic about sharing a lot of their perspectives, I may touch base with you via an email and just let you know, hey, thanks, I really appreciate it, but maybe give a chance to other people to kind of have their opinions heard too there. So do keep that in mind. A lot of the classes for this particular course, or a lot of the lectures for this course, will also be taught by others, which we'll talk about more in a second here. But they will have more or less the same perspective on that, and I'll let you know if they have a different approach. One other thing too, we have a Google form for the course, which is an anonymous suggestion box. There's a link to this too in your Canvas course, or in the Canvas module. I think it's the welcome module. But if at any point in the quarter you are having an issue, or you have a suggestion for the course, something's really not working for you, you're having a problem with colleagues, you're more than welcome to anonymously submit something in our online suggestion box. Totally anonymous. You can leave your email if you want to, but certainly don't have to. But we'll check that regularly, so please provide feedback if something isn't working for you. Our job as instructors is to make this successful and fun for you guys. This is a really cool course, and it breaks my heart if folks aren't having a good time with it. So please feel free to share suggestions or concerns. If something's not working for you, let us know, right? Cool. Any questions on kind of this community standard stuff? Hey, fantastic, great. No one's saying, no, I refuse to follow these community standards. Okay, so with that sort of collegial stuff out of the way, let's talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of the course. So as always, as every professor will say until the end of time, please, if you haven't yet, take some time to glance at the syllabus. The syllabus has all sort of the pertinent information for this course, when the exams are, what they might cover, deadlines, contact information for myself, contact information for your TAs, all of the above, right? One really important note, this is a large-ish class. So if you write emails to myself or to your TAs, please do your best to include WFC 50 or some permutation of that in the subject line. We get a lot of emails, and it's easy to let something kind of slip by if it has kind of a generic subject. So if you email us, please remember to include some version of WFC 50 in the subject. Chances are we'll still see it if you don't, but this is a good way to kind of flag us and make sure we know where these emails are coming from, right? On that note, when it comes to submitting assignments, it'll all go through our Canvas course, right? Anyone ever been on the Canvas course for this class yet? Anyone had trouble getting onto the Canvas course? Ah, that's great news. Fantastic. If you do, please let me know. We can fix it easily. Should be a quick fix. But all of our assignments, all of our little homeworks, all of our little habitat evaluations, that sort of thing, will be submitted through Canvas. So the biggest goal for this course that really ties everything together is to give you a chance to be exposed to California's really, really diverse natural history, ecosystems, all the above, and help you sort of develop this skill set to observe and interpret natural history in a way that is both fulfilling to you and scientifically meaningful. Kind of understanding how we tend to try to look at natural phenomena as scientists, to learn and observe as much as we can. That's the key thing here. Okay. So as you guys probably know, since you made it here, the class consists in part of 2 50-minute lectures per week, right? They are recorded. We have lecture capture going here, so hopefully that'll be successfully posted to your media library on Canvas. But one of the really, really cool things we have at UC Davis is a huge diversity of expertise when it comes to natural systems in California, right? So for example, I consider myself a decent expert when it comes to wetlands, some alpine ecosystems, maybe forests, that sort of thing, but I know very little about marine ecosystems. Luckily for us, we have world experts in just about all of these subjects and habitats. UC Davis is an incredibly highly ranked school for ecology, wildlife biology, that sort of thing. And so we have some amazing experts in the field. And so, luckily for you, about half of our lectures are going to be guest lectures by other faculty in the wildlife department. Folks like Dirk Van Vuren, who probably knows every elk in the Western Hemisphere by first name, right? Folks like Justine Smith, who does work on pumas in Argentina. I know, super not cool, right? It's very cool. So a lot of our guest lectures will give you a chance to talk to people who have a lot of expertise in the very subjects they're talking about. And classes like this are especially fun because in a class like this, we are not burdened with teaching you the names of all of the bones and muscles of a salamander. We can talk about the aspects of ecology and ecosystem that really make us excited, and hopefully share some of that excitement with you all. So attendance in lecture is not graded, right? Not graded at all. I will not notice if you do not show up in class. That being said, I really, really recommend, as every professor has already told you, that you show up as long as you're able, right? For a couple reasons. First of all, there's a literal ton of science on this that folks who actually come physically to class do better in terms of outcomes, in terms of grades. Even if you're someone who's fairly capable, there's a really strong scientific signal on this. The other thing too is, as I mentioned, this is a really cool and rare opportunity to interact with world experts on certain aspects of natural history. So it's a really good chance to meet and chat with the professors in the department and learn a little bit more about them, what they do, and have some questions answered. So again, attendance in lecture is not graded, but I recommend as much as you're able to show up. That being said, I understand folks get sick. If you're sick and feeling terrible, I recommend you watch the lecture rather than coming and risking infecting other folks. Yeah. We have 2 lecture homeworks. They're Canvas quizzes. They'll be mostly multiple choice. They'll be posted just a couple times over the course of the quarter, once at the end of January, once at the end of February. And the purpose of these is not to be particularly hard or challenging. You get 2 attempts. It's open note. But it really is just a way for me to encourage you to take a second, look back over the material, and do a little bit of review on your own. So this is a couple of assignments that we have that'll be coming up this month. Those will be posted on Canvas a couple days before they're due. They're not meant to be overly difficult or challenging. They're just a way to encourage you to review the material we've covered up to that point. We have a project on doing observations on local natural history. This will actually send you out into a habitat of your choosing to observe, practicing some of the techniques we talk about in class, document your findings, do some sketches, do some field notes, and that'll be due in March. We have our habitat account, which is really fun. It's kind of this compilation assignment in which you guys choose and are partially assigned to a habitat in California, something like chaparral, oak woodland, nearshore intertidal zone. And you guys will go through and, according to sort of different prompts and aspects, observe, document, and describe different parts of those habitat systems. That's broken up into a few different assignments, and so those will be due at various points over the course of the quarter. All right, when it comes to lab, I think it's listed as a discussion section, but same difference, right? Over the 10 weeks of the quarter, we have 7 labs, right? We don't have one this week. Obviously, instruction hadn't started. We don't have one President's Day. We don't have one MLK Day. They're all on Monday. So labs take place in Academic Surge, the teaching lab out there. Who's been there before? There's a lot of taxidermy in there, fair warning. It's pretty cool. You open the door and there's a lot of antelope heads looking at you. It's pretty cool. So one of the other cool resources we have in Davis is access to a really incredible wildlife museum, where folks, natural historians, have gone out and collected in various ways, some from living animals, some from dead, samples, skins, bones, claws, pelts, all these various things for academic study. We have these research collections of specimens of many plants, animals, various other natural specimens. And this course is your chance to actually look and interact with those specimens, to actually see a taxidermied coyote. You get to pet a stuffed coyote. Pretty cool, right? You get to hold an emu foot if you want to. Who's held an emu foot before? Good, there are no liars in this class. Oh, we have someone who's held an emu foot. Fantastic. I got to ask you about that at some point. So each lab, pretty straightforward. You'll come in. Each lab will correspond to one of the habitats we talk about. You'll look at some of the specimens that come from that ecosystem in California. You'll take some notes. You'll do some observations. You'll make a couple of sketches of those specimens, and that's it. It's a chance for you to practice looking at things in a scientific way. If you're someone who is incredibly artistically talented, like this student, you might do some fantastic sketches, trying to document certain aspects like the plumage of our belted kingfisher, looking at things like when different flowers bloom in a certain habitat. Or if you're someone like me who has the barest minimum of artistic talent, it's a duck. Don't worry, because it turns out that even if you're not a great artist, and I certainly am not, the act of drawing a specimen is really helpful in the sense that it just kind of forces you to look at all of the different aspects of an animal, plant, whatever you're drawing, and really think about how they're structured, how they might be adapted to their environment, how they developed, and might be related to one another, right? So you'll be guided. We have fantastic TAs with their own expertises here. They'll kind of walk you through how this is often done, and you guys can develop sort of your own practices and ethics around this. Okay, in terms of tests, we do have a lab final. It takes place in our last lab section. So it's not during finals week or anything like that. I have some sample questions on what you might see on that lab final, but there are some examples of that on the lab schedule or lab syllabus, one of those documents on Canvas, if you're curious about that well in advance. So when you put that all together, here's kind of the breakdown of our various assignments. Each of them are worth certain amounts of points. We have our lecture midterm, lecture final, lab assignments that all come together to form your final grade. So this is kind of how things are distributed. All of our course materials are organized in modules on Canvas. You'll get a chance to see everything as it's posted. I always try to upload PowerPoints as best I can the night before the lecture they pertain to. So that would be Monday and Wednesday nights. With the number of guest lectures we have, some folks tend to work on things at the last minute, so I can't guarantee that's always the case. But I promise I'll do my best to always upload our PowerPoints before lecture in case folks like to use those as reference materials during the class. OK, that's kind of the nuts and bolts. Again, probably something you all have seen before, so no huge surprises there. Please let me know if you have any suggestions or any things that would work better on this. A couple things to keep in mind. I said all the dates are on the syllabus, but I will also do my best to make sure that I repeat upcoming dates and deadlines. We'll talk about this on Thursday, but for our habitat study, sort of newest deadline will be on the 16th. Our first midterm will be February, or our only midterm is February 6th. Hang on just a minute, folks. And the final exam, unfortunately, we have a Friday final exam on finals week. I'm going to see if I can get that tweaked in the next couple weeks. I may or may not be able to, but fair warning. Question?
Do you recommend for our lab sketches to have like a field book that we dedicate to this class, like a sketchbook?
That's a good question. The question is, do you recommend having some kind of notebook or field journal, something like that? Yeah. Depending on what your style is, if you're someone who likes to take notes on loose leaf paper, that's great. If you want to buy, a little journal, if you want to be really fancy and official, there's this brand of field journal called Write in Rain, which is waterproof paper, great for ecologists going out in rainy field conditions. But as long as you have some kind of writing implement and some way to write it down, you will eventually be turning in these collective journals. OK, and that's all about it. But I really want to kind of finish on something really exciting. Some of these natural histories and natural mysteries we've seen in California, some of which have been solved and some of which are continuing to be unsolved. Remember vernal pools before? Yes. Yeah, vernal pools, these little bodies of water that show up in spring. We have some famous ones in California. In the spring and summer, and early summer, when it's really rainy, things are wet, there are these lovely, beautiful ponds. In the dry season, they look like this. Absolutely bone dry, cracked earth, nothing like that, right? Absolutely nothing aquatic, no water in there whatsoever. And yet, when early natural scientists took a look inside these vernal pools, after years of drought, potentially, after 3 years of drought, where these vernal pools never filled with any water whatsoever, they found these little critters, fairy shrimp. Not microscopic, not even particularly small, a couple inches long in some cases. These vernal pools had been dry for 4, 5, 6, 7 years sometimes. And yet, days after rain, scientists and ecologists out in these vernal pools found these sizable fairy shrimp out in the pond. How did they get there? We'll talk about that on Thursday morning. You can also Google it, but we'll talk about it on Thursday afternoon. Cool. Thanks, folks. If anyone has any questions, I'll hang out for a bit. I'm really looking forward to working with you all.